Hello guys, welcome back to Venture Agriculture Poultry Uganda with me Joshua. Right here I'm still in school. It's a very beautiful afternoon that I thought of sharing with you these videos. I sat back down and thought of how important it is to actually care about the feeds that you're going to give to your animals or your birds. Like how necessary it is for you to implement few things in giving feeds to your birds. How important it is to know the science in the feeds that you're going to give to your birds. Now, I'm going to focus more in poultry farming because that is where my journey is more laid to. I understand that there are lots of people who do different things. People who do, cattle, people who do pigs, people who do, goats and sheep, people who do other, poultry birds. But then I'm going to lay down to chickens. So I have a lot of the notes in this iPad. I have an iPad right here that I've tried to pile up several ideas. I'm going to just drive you through very fast and we understand more of the science. If there is any need, I'll be portraying others in the blackboard and others will just be seeing it portraying on the screen as you're watching through. It's very important to understand that birds like layers needs proteins. Birds like broilers needs proteins. It's okay that they need lots of carbohydrates, minerals, roughages, the grits, calcium and what have you, but then the protein levels in their feeds need to be met. So we are going to mix feeds and give different feeds to these birds, but then we should make sure that the protein levels is not cut, okay? The protein levels is given to that they require for their growth. Not too much because proteins are not stored by animals, and not too less because the animals would be stunted with growth. So with layers, as like we start with the chicks. So the chicks, you're going to need around 20% of the crude protein. 20% of crude protein in their feeds. As they grow and they become growers, they're going to need around 18% crude protein, and then as they go to layer 1, layer 2 stage, they don't even need much less of the proteins. That will drop to about 16% of the crude proteins. So this one is for growers. This one is for finishers. So these ones are for layers. So even the broilers, the starter broilers need about 22% of the feeds of proteins in their feeds. As they grow, that's from around week 3 to week 6. Those are the growers or the finishers of the broilers. They only need around 20% of the feeds of proteins in their feeds. So as you mix feeds and give feeds to the birds, you have to make sure that protein capacity, that protein amount is met in their feeds. And you should know that the feeds that you buy, okay, they're already made feeds by different factories, by different enterprises. They put in place methods and different things that enable them to meet such. And we're going to even discuss this till the end of the video. So stick right through the end as we are going to understand more. If you're dealing with locals or the dual-purpose birds, they're going to be much less. You know what? The feed conversion ratio for those birds are even much smaller. So you're going to start around 18%, whilst their chicks drop to around 16% as they grow, and then later on as they finish, you're going to even drop to around 14%. You get? So how we're going to meet in place this? So it's very good again to understand that if you're going to mix different feeds, you have maize, you have maize bran, you have rice bran, you have rice, you have wheat bran. Those are majorly energy source of feeds. They have very little protein. For example, maize itself has only 9% proteins. Freaking 9%. A whole maize grain. With the maize bran, just because it's a little bit modified, so it goes to around 10.5% of the crude protein. That is the maize bran. Okay, this one is maize bran. This one is for maize itself. like the whole maize grain. Like a lot of farmers will just take the maize grain, break it through, and then give them to the birds. Because now you're giving only 9%, but then we have said if you're dealing like with layers, you're going to need about 20%, 22% like for broilers if you're dealing with the chicks, 18% for locals. But in the maize, they are only 9%. That's very terrible. You're not going to feed your birds on only maize and then you expect them to grow normally with the very little protein levels. We have other carbohydrate sources like the cassava chips. Now, like the cassava chips, it's a lot common in some regions of Africa, yeah, but again in some other parts of the world it's again very rare. But it has around 4%. It has only 4% of the crude protein. That is cassava. Of course, in the chips, the dried ones. The fresh cassava is not so much advisable because of the high cyanide content that might be poisonous to our birds. So it's really not advisable to give a lot of fresh cassava. Like this cassava, you just go and pick from the garden and you come and you peel them and then you break them and give to the birds. Again, if you're dealing in commercial levels, that one might hinder you a lot. So cassava chips are also worth the go, but they have 4%, 4 out of the 20% that you need of the proteins, maybe if you're dealing with layers chicks, okay? Now, we have sweet potatoes, okay? We have sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes have around 7% crude protein. A lot of this one varies a lot, yeah? It varies a lot depending on the soils, the climate, you know, different conditions that make them vary. So you're going to add maybe a plus or minus 1 or 2% on this, but then cassava chips you can use them if you're dealing with less numbers of birds, like 100 and less, okay? So it has around 7%. These ones are sweet potatoes. These ones are sweet potatoes. So these are very common. We have others like the rice bran, okay? We have others like the maize bran. Wheat bran, depending on what is common with you. But for me, as a student who is going to start poultry farming, in fact, I have started poultry farming, yeah, somewhere in upcountry. Right now, I'm in the city of the country, trying to, you know, push up with scholars and stuff like that. So as you watch through, you're going to understand more of the going. So let's continue with our video. You're going to realize that all these are majorly energy-giving sources. These are energy. These are energy sources. Okay? These are energy sources. Now, how the hell are we going to make these protein levels increase before we give our feeds to the birds? That is a very important question. So we just don't give feeds just like that. So we're going to find that we have 2 types of protein sources that we're going to use. Number 1, most will be the plant proteins, and number 2 will be the more of animal proteins. Yeah, and you should understand that plant proteins, they have a little less, you know, percentage of crude proteins in them, whilst the animal proteins has a little more of the crude proteins in themselves. So with the plant proteins, we're going to have number 1, which is like soybean meal, okay? Soybean meal, it has around 45% of the crude protein, okay? 45% soybean meal. So if you're going to make a combination of maybe soybean and maize bran, you know, you're going to have some form of formula that will help you come up with the 20% of the protein that you need in your feeds. Some farmers use, okay, there's groundnuts, okay, meal. This one also has around 45% crude proteins, okay. But the thing with groundnuts is that it has got to have a lot of other commercial uses. You know, people like making pastes from it. I don't know, different countries have different names they call. You know, they get groundnuts and they fry them and then they sort of grind it to make pastes. So it has more other values somewhere else than to be used as chicken feeds. That makes it much more expensive. But if you can't afford, you can go with groundnuts if it's there available in your market. So groundnuts has again 45% compared to, like it's similar with soybean meal. The other one that is also common in some regions, that is simsim, okay? That is simsim. A lot of, okay, there is some other language that calls it sesame. Simsim has about 40% crude proteins. It's a little less compared to the groundnuts and the soybean, but if you still have it in large numbers and can process it, yeah, you can use simsim. And the other thing is people also use sunflower. The sunflower cakes, okay? Sunflower cakes or the sunflower meal or sort of that. After harvesting sunflower from the gardens, they extract the seeds by any method, mostly in Africa with the small farmers. They just pick the seeds, they get sort of sticks and beat them to, put the seeds out. And then they process the seeds, like making it to look really nice, removing sorts of dirt, and then it's shipped to the processing plant, where the processing plant has a mechanism of using pressure. They put load and roll on the sunflower seeds. That way, the oil that is in the seeds gets squeezed out, and then what remains as the residue, okay, that thing has lots of proteins in it, and that can be a very good source of protein substitute for our feeds. So if you can afford that and it's available to you, cheap, even me here in Uganda, it's what most farmers do use. So this one has around 30%, crude protein. It's a little less, but if it's available, yeah. Well, I'm going to show you a formula that you can use to, sort of mix the two and come up with our percentage that we need. I already told you, if it's for layers, we do around 20%, whilst their chicks, as they grow, they go to around 18, okay? As they go higher with, like, the sort of finishers, it even comes down to 16, okay? If you're going to deal with broilers, you're going to mix these feeds, the proteins that you need begins from 22 as the chicks, like 22% as the chicks. As they finish, they have very short cycle for broilers, like the Cobb 500 species, like many farmers, a lot of you do have, the Rose 308 that a lot of you have. Even right here in Uganda, there is another breed that is now coming up. It's called the Hubbard, okay? All those ones give me 22% as they grow, in 6 weeks, which means the first 3 weeks, 22% proteins, make sure they're there in the feeds, and then the last 3 weeks, from 3 to 6 weeks, make sure that it's about 20%. These are the plant sources for proteins. Now we have the animal sources. Okay. Now the animal sources, people use stuff like silverfish. Okay, like for the case of silverfish, it has around 60%, which means you're going to just need a little of silverfish. You're going to add on the maybe maize bran or the maize or the wheat, whatever you have in your society, to make the percentage reach faster. People have blood meal, okay? Others have blood meal. Others have fish meal. Yeah? So it can be around 70% on average, okay? Depends on how good you have kept it, like in terms of moisture, and lots of storage precautions that you take. So these are the animal. These are the animal sources of proteins. So the other part of the video is understanding how the hell are we going to, mix all these other sources to come into one. I'm going to tell you, like, a lot of you go and buy, there's these feeds here called pellets, okay? You have pellets that you go and buy from any feed processing company. In Uganda, we have like Henricks, we have Cowardice, and lots of others. So these companies just implement some formula that I'm going to show you to make sure that they mix all these other different things to come up with one, like, source of protein. So that is the Pearson square. So I'm going to take you through the Pearson square. At least we understand how we're going to mix these all other different ingredients in order to come up with our protein percentage which is required. So what the hell is Pearson square? Pearson square is a method used in animal nutrition to mix feeds with different, particular nutrient levels to come up with one. Like I told you, like you have maize and it has only 9% of crude protein. And then you have like soybean has 45% crude proteins. How are you going to mix the two? Like what amounts of maize and what amounts of soybean do you need to put together to have like 20% crude proteins in it, like if you're dealing with layers? How am I going to come up with 14% of crude proteins if I'm going to give them to my local birds whilst they are finishing, whilst they are growing? So the Pearson square. So as we're going to deal with the Pearson square, first we're going to require to draw a square. Okay? We have to draw a square. I don't think it's very perfect, yeah, but it looks like one. So the whole formula works like it's a square. Like we have this part, like this column, okay. Then we have this column, okay. Then we have this row, and then this other row. So here we're going to put like our ingredients, okay. I don't know if it's much clearer. So we're going to put here our ingredients. In the middle, we're going to realize that it will be for our target, okay? And then this other column is going to be for our proportions, or the parts that we are actually going to mix together. So we have our ingredients. This is how the Pearson square works. So we have our ingredients, like I told you, for example, like we had our maize bran and soybean meal. We know maize bran has around 11% crude proteins. Soybean meal has 45% crude protein. We want to make 20% crude protein, like for our starter chicks, okay? So our target is 20%. We're going to write it straight in the middle here. It's 20%, that's our target. So with the ingredients that we have corners of the squares, we have this corner and this corner, yeah, as you can see. So I'm going to take one of them, like maybe let me say it's maize, I don't know, maize, okay. Let's take maize. Maize, the percentage level, I know it's 9% crude protein, and then I'm going to mix with what? Okay, let me say I have soybean, okay, yeah, soybean, I know it has 45%, of the crude proteins. So what I'm going to do, how the formula works, it works with subtracting diagonally. So we got to subtract diagonally, yeah, from here, and then it takes us back up to this corner. So, and then we're going to take another subtraction diagonally. I'm just trying to eliminate the negatives. So I'm going to go in any way subtracting. Like I have 45 minus 20. That's around 25. That's 25 parts. Okay, because this is in parts or proportions, this is 25 parts. So I have 9. So this one, how should it go to get negative? So I should subtract in this way. So it will be like 20 minus 9. That will be, in fact, this one was like 45 minus 20, which is 25 parts. And then here, it's 11 parts. So you're going to understand that now I have 25 parts of maize. So we're going to use these rows that we have, you see. So we're going to do, we shall not say it is 25 parts of soybean meal, no. So it's 25 parts of maize that we're going to need to mix in our feeds. And then we have 11 parts of soybean that we're going to need to mix, okay? So let's add up the parts together. So you're going to add, in the addition, we're going to have 25 plus 11, which is 36 parts. So the total parts that we have is 36 parts. So if I want to get like the kilograms of the maize that I want to use, or what percent of maize that I'm going to use, so I see that then for maize is 25. Okay, for maize I have 25 over the total parts, which is 36, times, if I'm looking for percentage of it, I'll put times 100. If I wanted to mix 100 kilogram bag, I would put that, like I want to make a 50 kilogram mixing ratio. I want to make 50 kilograms of the feeds. I will put here the kilograms. For now, let's take, I want to make 100, okay, a percentage times 100%, which will be 69.4%. You get. So how much of the soybean do I need? So the soybean, I have 11 parts of soybean over 36 parts times 100%, or you can just subtract. Okay, so that's about 30.5. Okay, 30.5.6. 0.555 recurring percent. You get. So this way I have known how much of the energy giving part and then the protein giving parts do I need to put them together to make my feeds that I'm going to give to the birds. Now there are lots of other things that I'm going to need to mix in the feeds, like there is calcium, there are grits that you need to put, there are several minerals, and water itself. And in most cases, you cannot afford all these other small minor nutrients, like meeting the zinc amounts, meeting the magnesium, going into a lot of all those chemistry and biology. But we have different feed mixing companies that have dedicated themselves, they have done the laboratory tests, and then they give you what is called a concentrate. What the hell is concentrate? Concentrate is already mixed form of sort of ingredient that you buy, and then it's like kalungu, we call it here in Uganda, sort of kalungu, that you're going to buy and mix with this maize and soybean or the cassava chips that you have to enrich their feeds. As you're going to buy these feeds, they give you a chart that you're going to follow that has all the amounts of the feeds, how much of the maize, how much of the soybean, how much of the sunflower cake, how much of the so they have different types of concentrates, like 5% concentrate, there is 10% concentrate, there is 20% concentrate. A lot of them, they come with the charts that you're going to follow as you're going to mix your feeds together. Thank you for watching. Hope you've enjoyed the video. Lots of love.